Alright, I'll be ready to get started in 1 second here. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay, I think I have all my fluids. Let's see, let me get the chat open too. Okay, so yeah, I hope you will. This is my first time streaming like with this setup, so I hope you'll let me know if anything is weird, if sound's not coming through or anything like that. I think it looks like my mic is live and everything, so yeah, I'll type that in the chat too. So this is, you can see over my shoulder, this is my office. I share this space with like a bunch of other people here in downtown Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And so you might see some people in the background, or there might be some noise at some point Saturday afternoon, but still a lot of people come to work on the weekend. So today, yeah, I just thought it would be fun to look through the different map modes in the game. So these are like, you know, like the overworld where you're navigating with the truck and finding vignettes, or on the Zero itself or on the river. These are some of like our favorite parts of the game, or have been our favorite parts of the game to work on. But I don't think we've ever done like a newsletter or a blog post or anything kind of like going into them in detail, so I just thought that would be a fun thing for us to do. So let me open up the overworld first, and we can take a look at our, yeah, just like a baseline look at what the scene actually is. I hope the sound mixes okay here. So yeah, this is the first overworld. This is like right after you would have encountered Joseph at KRZ Overworlds. And there are sort of major scenes, you know, that you can travel to, indicated by the down arrow, like the farmhouse or back to KRZ Overworlds. And then there are also smaller text-only scenes that we call vignettes. There's one down, yeah, like this diner. So those are indicated by the eyeball icon. So the sort of creative constraints for these vignettes that we set up, established in like Act 1, and we've kind of pursued for the subsequent episodes, are there are these like text and sound moments. So they, you know, we have, like Ben did a lot of sound design for treatments for the different rooms that you go into and stuff, and these sort of like choose your own adventure style vignettes. We wrote them a bit differently also, so whereas all of the dialogue in the game, or all the rest of the writing in the game, is written as though it's like sort of stage directions or like a play script, you know, with like character name and then the line of dialogue that they say, and then actions in parentheses. So instead, in the overworld scenes, all of these text adventure vignettes are written in third person, and the options, instead of being choices of things to say, they're always like commands. And then when you choose one, it changes the, instead of inserting the command as it is, you get like a sort of third person text description of it. Sort of to kind of to create a transcript so that you can scroll back up. Well, actually, you can't scroll back up in the version of the game that's out now, but this is a new feature for when Act 5 comes out. This will be in the main game. You can scroll back and read the old text, and you can get like just a sort of transcript that reads as though it were a short story or a novel or something. Yeah, that's something that we started doing in Act 1. I've seen this kind of treatment of the record of the player's gameplay in a text adventure being treated more deliberately more recently. Like, if you look at stuff by like Inkle Studios, like 80 Days does like an incredible job of this, of like changing all of your choices, like rewording them into past tense and making them look like, so that when you scroll back through 80 Days after you've played one of the encounters, it reads really well, like the kind of novel that it's sort of emulating. So yeah, I don't know, I really admire that in Inkle's writing. So these are mostly these vignettes in episode 1. I was kind of still trying to feel out what these should even be. And so they're mostly these really distanced, sort of glancing encounters with nobody talks to each other in any of these. And they're just these sort of like weird distancing encounters. That was also kind of weird. It sounded like one of the audio files in the environment stopped looping for some reason there. That was probably a bug. And then also in a lot of these vignettes, we have this detail about Conway asking about the basketball game that shows up several times. Yeah. And then the third, I guess, type of encounter that we have here on the highway, I don't know, this might crash when I try to do it, are these what we call visual vignettes. And so these are like optional side scenes that have like a visual treatment that Tomas made, with the space and everything, but they aren't required locations to advance the plot. And usually they have fairly little text, if any text at all, but it uses the same treatment as like the main scenes in the game. Cool. I'm sorry, there's a really long delay between the chat and the video, so sorry if I missed something, question or something, but please feel free to ask questions, and I'll do my best to keep on it. These options about describing when you leave a scene, like giving you options to stay or leave, this is something we added kind of recently too. It's sort of boring, but okay. So let's take a look at the scene file, what the scene actually looks like. You can see it's this big flat drawing, like totally flat line drawing. I mean, it is actually 3D geometry, but they're all just made in Blender using like vertices, drawn out like that. So to make these maps, first I think I traced them from like, I just took a screenshot of like a highway map of central Kentucky, and I traced it in Blender the way you would, if you were like tracing a reference photograph of a character or something, and you would kind of like draw vertices and edges around it. So I did that, and then I think Tomas, we had that as like a starting point, and then I think Tomas redid it and made it a lot cleaner. Probably it's usually how it goes if I touch anything, anything with having to do with the models. I mean, so yeah, I think Tomas redid it at some point, and then also added stuff like having these different rendering styles for different types of landforms, like this one for the river here, which I guess I can't really select, but yeah, so the river has this kind of dashed treatment. It's actually animated when the scene plays. So he made like a shader to do the animated dashed line. These are supposed to sort of emulate road maps, right? So you have this dashed line, but we get to animate it because we have a computer. And this shape here is the actual Mammoth Cave Park. And then here's a lake up here. Lakes have this cool jaggy style with the animated dashed line fill. Yeah, what else? Oh yeah, we have the label here that tells you which road you're on, real road, which is only useful in a couple of moments in the game, but it might help you get your bearings. And then in order to, so it's like trying to design this overworld, and our use case for it was like to get a player from one scene to another, and also we really wanted to give the player the sense of like being lost on the highway, because this is sort of a, you know, this character Conway is like a professional driver, so he's like has some familiarity with the highways, but he's like maybe never been to exactly this part of central Kentucky before, and he's, you know, we want the player to feel they're looking for something, that they don't know where it is. So it was, yeah, that was like kind of a tricky sort of design problem for us to, you know, not make the player get stuck navigating or like spend a bunch of time wandering, and we also didn't want to give them, you know, like in a lot of open world games, you have to navigate from point A to B, but you have sort of like horse autopilot, or you have some other kind of map that's always telling you where to go, and it wasn't like super interesting to us. So um, the we came up with a couple of tricks to help the player preserve this sense of being lost. So one of them, I don't know if this will work. Yeah, okay, I don't have the notes. Oh wait, I can do this, I think. Can I? Let's see. Do my cheat code here. Yeah, okay. So here is the player's journal with all these notes. So like, yeah, here's directions to get to the Marquez farmhouse. So instead of giving them like a you know, a waypoint on the map, we give them these directions that are written as though they're, you know, directions that somebody, they're written as like common speech, like somebody told you these directions. Head northeast on 65, turn left as soon as you see the ugly tree that's always on fire. And so also like the landmarks are sort of strange and sort of intuitive, natural things, or just like weird landmarks that stand out to people. It's trying to like emulate this experience you have when you ask for directions at a gas station. Somebody's like, oh, turn left at there's a pond, and you see there's usually some cows out by the pond, or whatever. You know, it's just like these weird sort of effective descriptions based on what people actually notice in the environment. Or I always like directions that are like, oh, you got to turn where they used to have that movie theater. Like they have these like sort of descriptive local historical directions to find places. Um, so so that's kind of like makes it a little trickier for the player. They're like watching for some kind of landform instead of, um, you know, just like going to a waypoint. And then another thing is that we have this extra treatment. You can see the tree that's always on fire only really appears when you get within a certain radius. So it's just got this, you can kind of see how it appears. It's like the edge of a circle. So basically this, the truck icon, the wheel icon, has kind of a radius around it where within which you can see, it's like masking out this category of landmark. Another one is the artificial limb factory up here. Oops, is that, I think I passed it actually. Oh, maybe because I haven't found it yet. Should be. Well, the artificial limb factory is down here somewhere. I don't know why it's not showing up. But yeah, and then there's another one. There's like an observatory in the southwest. Yeah, the artificial limb factory actually was a spot that I used to go hang out at in Seattle. There's this music venue and record store on Capitol Hill called the Artificial Limb Factory. That has like kind of a mysterious name for it. So this is kind of like what we ended up at after a lot of experimentation and trial and error as the kind of like way that you navigate between scenes. I wanted to show you, just out of historical interest, the Ariane says maybe you can't see the limb factory by this point. I think that might be true. Yeah. So it's been so long since I played Act 1 of this game. So yeah, let's look at our sandbox scene here, and this is a kind of early experiment that we did trying to figure out how to make these navigation scenes. So at first, our first idea was to do something kind of emulating this stuff from Full Throttle. So Full Throttle is also a game about driving around on the highway, and it was like this mechanic was always like just kind of frozen in my mind, where you have this third-person view and you can ride on the road. We wouldn't have had any like fist fights like this, obviously, but the part that I like about this is that you have to pay attention to your turns, and like you might miss your turn and have to turn around and come back, which I thought is like kind of a nice thing. That's a thing that happens to you on the highway all the time, especially if you're lost. Probably would have taken up a lot of time if we had actually made the player watch for these turns. So this was a sandbox scene where Tomas built an interior of like a kind of cockpit view of the truck, and you can see the environment of Kentucky in the background. Yeah. So this would have been, yeah, you would have been driving in first person in the truck and maybe seen some road signs to take turns off. The truck interior was actually, we had an idea that like a lot of stuff would happen in the truck interior. You would have these conversations probably with Shannon sitting in the front seat as you're driving between locations. There's some like random conversations maybe. And I think that we only kind of have a couple moments. I can only think of 2 moments in the game where you actually do have a conversation with another character while you're driving. But yeah, originally it was going to be a much bigger part of the game. Also, we had this idea that you would spend a lot of time like inside the truck, like just sitting in the back of the truck, talking to the other characters that were hitching a ride with you. So, we were thinking that the truck interior would have to be rendered in some detail. So Tomas went ahead and built this model. We decided not to use this approach, but other kinds of points of reference for what we did end up with are definitely the work of Jane Veeder, who I'm sure you all have heard us reference before, but this is an artist that Tomas in particular is really cares about. So Veeder was working with some tech called ZGrass. This is like early computer graphics, 2D computer graphics package. Here's another demo of ZGrass. This is Tom DeFonte, another Chicago artist, giving us a walkthrough of how to do real-time painting, digital painting with ZGrass.
The Datamax UV1 is the first computer graphics system to give artists access to the sophisticated technology of the new video arcade games. It's produced in Chicago, Illinois, but a lot of the software was written and designed up here in rural Wisconsin in this cabin. My name is Tom DeFonte. Copper Giloth, Ralph Zaritsky, and I are here today making this videotape to show you the compatibility of this system with standard video equipment. We're going to show you how to do computer graphics in real time. For instance, it's early spring in Wisconsin and there's not much green. We're going to add some with a digital airbrush. Let's look at a block diagram of the system. Here we have the UV1, which has the software and the memory in it. Down here we have the data tablet, which the operator uses to input drawings and also to choose menu items. Over here we have the video display terminal, which is used to put out messages to the operator and also to type in letters for character generation. And up here we have a TV monitor, which is useful for showing everything that's going on. Let's go inside now and I'll show you the system for real.
Okay. So yeah, we actually, in this, another thing that we tried out was having this first-person view with those kind of like graphics laid over the top of it, of a map. So this was like kind of a midpoint between this mode where you're looking for turnoffs and then what we finally ended up with, the sort of like schematic computer-looking map view. So yeah, as we were kind of like trying out this overlay mode, then we just decided it was more interesting just to stick with the map. Here's another piece by, let's see, is this the one I wanted? Or, yeah, okay, I think this is right. Yeah. In this one, this is a small excerpt from a piece called Program 7 by Phil Morton and Jane Veeder, and this one you can see ZGrass being used in a way that's like a lot more familiar as the overworld look for Kentucky Route Zero. So.
Yellowstone coming up. Oops. Yellowstone. Oops. Glacier. Bison. I got Route 2 good. Down in Chicago.
You wrecked us. Get back in the country. Back down to Chicago.
Going back out.
You're ready for over number 5. You're out. Go.
I erased us.
Hyperspace, Colorado.
Don't forget the beat. Okay. Reno. You good.
Oakland.
Reno, Sacramento.
Mojave.
There it is. Whoa! Stations
Tucson. Back to Santa Fe.
Oh, back the other way.
Coming back into home base.
Cool. Yeah, so I definitely recognized one of those voices was Jamie Fenton, who was a game designer who was working with the Bally Astrocades, like working on some early arcade machine hardware, and that. So it was kind of like interesting that this old video art, you know, actually like a lot of it ran on video gaming hardware. And then now here we're making this video game and like going back and pulling that stuff out. I love the sound in that video, but we used a very different treatment for the sound in our game, of course, because it wouldn't have fit tonally. But we did maintain a little bit of the weirdness sonically. The engine sound, let me go back to the overworld real quick. Yeah, let's listen to the engine sound that the truck makes when it drives. It's a little faint. Let's try to crank it up. So I know that was kind of hard to hear. I thought it was a little bit louder, but let me just open up the sound file. We can hear it. Let's see. Yeah, it should be in here somewhere. Maybe it's an overworld sounds. Yeah, here's the sound mix. Okay, so this, I'm gonna open this up in Audacity. So this is just for the sound that the engine makes as it's driving. Yeah, that's really loud. Whoops, not the speed, the volume. Okay. So, like, out of context, without the rest of the audio mix in there, you can hear like there's a lot of weird synthesizer noises and stuff. It's also, I just realized this loop is like 3 minutes long, which is kind of ridiculous. There's no reason it needs to be that long. But this audio was actually sampled from this video called General Motors by Phil Morton, which features Jane Vietor and all these other people that we've been talking about. And you've maybe seen if you've followed our work for long, because we're always linking to this video and talking about it. I think I have this paused at the scene where that sound plays. Maybe not. Let's see what's going on here. Oh no, I guess I don't. I guess it restarted. So let's see, what is the timestamp for that? 37 minutes. Yeah.
Blocked our vision, we couldn't see anything away. Mexico Station, yeah, 10-4, if you take this 270 up here north, it'll save you a little bit of trouble. You won't have to run through downtown Denver. Okay, 270 for sure. 10-4, yeah, 270 to 25 north, the 30.
So you can kind of hear the same sound treatment is underneath this. This is where we sampled it from. Also, if you are a game designer and you want to make a racing game that looks like this,
That way, you know, you don't have to.
I will buy your game. That would be really cool. Yeah, so this is Act 1, the Act 1 overworld, and we have a different scene file for each map mode in each episode. So like in Act 2, we just have a copy of the scene file. I just opened up the Act 2, and you can see like the map is the same. There's a few extra things, like added this landmark here for the museum, and there's an observatory down here. Oh yeah, there's the observatory icon. This is another one of those ones that you have to sneak up on to catch it. And yeah, what else is different in here? I guess mainly the difference in the Act 2 scene files, the vignettes are different. I go ahead and open up one of those objects just because I don't know if they're interesting or not. Let's see, here's the abandoned van. So yeah, these are, the actual vignettes are these actor objects, which is the same type of object as any conversation in the game. And they just have like a zone, like a collider, and once the truck collides with this collider, then it pops up the icon and you can click on it, and it tells the game where to drive and tells the truck where to stop, and then displays the story. Yeah, I guess there's nothing else really unique in Act 2's overworld. But also in Act 2, you don't start in the overworld in Act 2. You first get to go to the underworld. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So the underworld, meaning the 0, is very different. You can see, like, I've got the scene file open here, and there's kind of like nothing in it except for this weird pile of 3D models that we can encounter different points in the game. And a lot of them don't even show up until you kind of click. This is a really mysterious scene file to work on because it's actually all kind of being constructed procedurally. But then as you open things and select them, Unity gets really weird in the scene editor. It's kind of cool. You can get some kind of interesting shapes. So these are all of the icons kind of stacked up on top of each other. I always like how that looks. So when we play the scene, yeah, let's see. Yeah. Okay, so what's going on here? There's a lot going on here. This underworld, like the 0, took also kind of a long time for us to figure out. This was mainly Tomas's work, and we were like having conversations about it, but he was the one that was kind of implementing all this and yeah, working it out. And there, yeah, so we wanted the 0 to be like navigating the surface, but instead of the directions being spatial, we wanted them to feel kind of ritualistic. So like you're driving in a ritualistic way to sort of like summon or activate or discover these different locations that you're trying to find. So the first thing that we tried didn't look like this at all. It looked like the overworld map, except that you just had a small radius around your truck that you could see, and the map would be getting sort of assembled piece by piece outside of your area of view, so you could drive infinitely, and it was kind of like reconstructing itself. And it would be different, you know, and if you drove over to the left for a while and then drove back to the right, things would be different than they were before when you were there. And the only way to find anything would be to follow directions that were like drive in a circle 3 times or whatever. So I took some time to try to implement that, and I hit some roadblocks having to do with the navigation system at the time in Unity. We were using Unity's nav system that they provide, and it couldn't really handle changing the the map in real time. And I tried to do some clever workarounds for that, but I didn't have any luck. And yeah, I don't know, then Tomas tried this approach, and it was like worked a lot better, it was a lot more interesting anyway. And there's a lot of detail in here that that he built that I want to kind of call out. So one thing that I always really liked about this scene is that so you can drive, you know, either with the gamepad or the mouse, obviously, right? If you click and hold ahead of your car, like you don't actually have to move the mouse. The hand just like follows the road. I always really liked that. So you can just kind of click and it'll keep going by itself. And then the other really complex thing here has to do with the size of the tunnel. So you can see these loops, these like single pixel line loops around you, kind of representing the diameter of the tunnel. Imagining that the 0 is a highway that runs through caves, so it's going through all these tunnels. And so they kind of randomly increase and decrease in size. And that drives a few different parameters on the audio mix. So for the music in the scene, let me unmute that for a bit. So I haven't hit any big variations, so it might be kind of hard to hear, but basically the diameter of the tunnel changes some properties in the sound having to do with like the reverb. So like it makes, maybe, I wonder if we can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see it here. It's probably really tiny. Let's see. Let's try. I'm going to try zooming into these parameters so that you can kind of see as it happens. Okay, so you can kind of see how the reverb properties are changing depending on the diameter of the tunnel. So the decay time scales up and down. This diffusion property scales up and down. A few different parameters change. Yeah, the hot dog asks, is the path the wheel takes also a little procedural? And yeah, you can see the route around the circle. It kind of wavers. It has like some noise offsetting a perfect circle, so it kind of wavers and wanders. And then the way you navigate the 0 is you come up to special landmarks, and you can turn around when you stop and turn around at those landmarks, and it sort of shifts you to a different set of landmarks at that point. So it's like if we were thinking about it as like a combination lock. So you turn to the right until you get to a certain number, and then you have to turn counterclockwise until you get to a certain number. So in our case, like the directions you might get are like go clockwise until you hit the crystal, and then we stop at the crystal and wait for it to change, to indicate to us, and then we can turn around And now the map has different symbols around the circle. And so now that we've turned around to the crystal, I think we've unlocked the storage facility, or maybe it was, yeah, so here's the storage facility now. So the data structure for that is this underworld symbols hierarchy here. And you can see we've got all these different main, let me zoom in on this again. Oh, it's called magnifier, isn't it? Okay, so underneath underworld symbols, there's all these different main groups, right? These are the kind of the different, if you imagine there's like a bunch of different circles that you hop between whenever you change direction at a certain landmark. So there's the main one, the storage one, and these others have names based on what symbols are contained in them. And then some of the symbols, like, let's see the crystal here. So yeah, it has a label, it has a time, which if I recall correctly, that's like an angle where it is on the clock, kind of, you imagine this thing being a clock. So it's like the degree angle of where you find it. I think that's right, but maybe it starts at a weird position. I mean, maybe 0 is at a strange spot, and that's why it's 135 here. You can also choose whether the symbol appears only in one direction or in both directions. So some of them you have to approach them from a certain direction. And then because this is so, you know, we were trying to like come up with this design that was like really befuddling and mysterious and like felt like, you know, we wanted you to always kind of feel like you're navigating, you're following these directions, but you're never really sure, like, is it working? Am I doing this right? Until you're done and you're like, okay, I guess I was doing that right. This is kind of weird feeling. But again, we don't want people to get stuck here if they, you know, are having trouble with this kind of spatial reasoning or whatever, for whatever reason, if they're having trouble following this, we don't want people to get stuck. So so that was a tension with this design that took us, Tomas in particular, a lot of work to kind of like nail. And what we came up with is this little icon in the lower left here that was like 3 Z's, and that indicates that you're getting tired and you want to let somebody else drive. So Conway can let Shannon drive, and that'll just warp you to wherever you need to be next. To advance the plot. So it doesn't uncover like the hidden locations on the 0, which are like these, you find this bureau or this pamphlet of the Bureau of Secret Tourism that tells you about all these hidden places you can find. It doesn't reveal those, but it just kind of warps you to the next spot that you need to be at, like the storage facility. That's, like I mentioned, that's one of the only, I think, 2 spots in the game where you have a conversation while you're driving. So yeah, here's the storage facility. Yeah. So that's the underworld in Act 2, or what we call the underworld. That's the 0. Go open up the Act 3 overworld. The Act 3 map introduces another new feature. I think is actually only present in the map modes in Act 3, and it's the radio. So for this one, I can't just hit play, because if you remember, when you get to the map first in Act 3, your truck breaks down really fast. So actually, if I just hit play, this is what happens. So yeah, you don't have the radio yet, and yeah, the truck breaks down. So in order to test this, I need to run it from a bookmark. This is something I just wanted to show off because it's really helped us out a lot. We made this system a few acts ago. Oh, somebody asked what was the other spot where you talk while driving. Yeah, you're right. There was the deja vu moment while you're in the car having a conversation. But I was thinking of the spot where you are driving here and listening to the radio in the overworld, and you have to like find the right radio station in order to reveal the entrance to the 0. And Shannon and Conway talk about the radio there a little bit. So I think that's the other instance of like regular dialogue in a map mode. Just weird trivia. But so to get to the moment in the map in Act 3 where we can listen to the radio, we use this bookmark system. So we have bookmarks for every episode and all the interludes, and they just like set up all the conditions to warp us to a specific moment where certain things have happened. And that's really important in a game like this that has so many different little states and conditions, and it's like so content driven and also so slow. Like it would take a really long time to test test setting up all these conditions every time with the pacing of the game and with all the dialogue that you have to skip through and stuff. So we made this bookmark system, and these are basically just save files that I made playing the game, just like saving and copying the save file periodically, and we just built a system that lets you run save files from within the editor. So if you're working on a large content-driven game, I highly recommend coming up with a system like this as early as possible because it'll really change the way that you are able to work on that game, and it's super valuable for a lot of different kinds of testing. So I'm going to run the bookmark called After Breakdown. This is the bookmark where we can test the radio without anything else interrupting. Okay, so now we have, the radio. This radio has been redesigned from the version that you can play on Steam or whatever right now. This will be in the next update. So you can navigate the radio by dragging or by clicking this, which does like a seek to the next station. But not all stations are seekable, so we can flag the stations so that you have to manually find them. If we have a really spooky station. Like this one. And then also new in the latest, or the next update, is that there's also an FM band now, so Ben made a bunch more music. So I won't spoil too much of that, but there's a whole new set of stations. So in the overworld, we have like music on the radio, and you can kind of turn it on and drive around, like in Grand Theft Auto. That's what we were thinking. And then in the underworld, we had to do something a little bit different with the radio, because the underworld has already music playing all the time, and it's like important because it responds to the tunnel size and stuff like we were looking at earlier. So we didn't want to like mute the music when you turn the radio on. Right. So here the radio is all based on speech, so that it fits with the background music. Except for FM is like soundscapes, I guess, this kind of stuff that still blends, but it's like a little more tonal and intense. Also, I don't know if you can hear it, but like we get to a bigger tunnel. The user interface also has reverb on it. that is responsive to the tunnels, which Ben kind of hates, but Tomas and I both really like, so we haven't fixed it yet. But oh yeah, that's a couple questions. So, do we plan to do any more Steam betas? Yeah, it has been a while since we put up one of those, and yeah, I think we will do one more of those just to try to catch any other bugs. But it's a little hard because, as you mentioned, Eleanor, yeah, like we've been working a lot on Act 5, and so we have to kind of, in order to post one of those updates, we have to pull a lot of stuff out so that you don't trip over like some Act 5 spoiler or something while you're playing it. So, but yeah, I do want to post one more beta just to catch a few more bugs. We're going to go into a pretty heavy QA mode pretty soon here, so I'll be sure to let you all know about that. I appreciate your help bug catching in there. And what else, Kevin? What did you ask? Yeah, cool. I hope I didn't miss anyone's questions. Let me know if I did. Yeah, what else can I show you down here? Oh yeah, there's two other overworld modes, two other map modes. So one of them is this Julian overworld. So this is from Act 2, and this is after the Julian the Eagle picks you up in the museum and takes you to this map mode that uses a lot of the same art from the other overworld maps, but it extends the map out quite a bit and it gives you a different angle on it. I have the audio muted just for a second here, but yeah, so this one is another one that Tomas did. Did all the design and implementation for. So in this one, yeah, the map, it's obviously we're like spinning, so we can get like different angles on it and get disoriented. Since you've spent a lot of time in this map now, we wanted you to get disoriented again. Has this cool flapping animation. I don't know if you can see this like subtle gradation kind of radiating out of the flaps, and the landscape is thanks, Hot Dog. Okay, I'll make sure Ben sees that. And there are, yeah, so the natural features are extended quite a bit, like the rivers go out a bit further, there's more lakes added, and some of the roads kind of extend out a bit further. I'll play the music now for a bit, and I'll stop talking. So I just wanted to point out the music changes as you move away from civilization. Just it kind of fades between two pieces or two mixes that Ben made. And the location label changes here. Instead of telling you about roads, it tells you about natural features to kind of think about the different perspective of the eagle. Excuse me. All of the vignettes up here are really short because they're all different perspectives on vignettes that you've seen before. So most of these vignettes only appear if you've seen a corresponding vignette on the overworld map. Some of them are related to other things. So let me try to find a vignette and click on it. Okay, here's the museum. Okay, so that's actually not a vignette, but it's the museum scene. So you can see it. You see scenes from earlier in the episode or from episode 1, but you just get information about how they look from way up high. So Act 2, the kind of thematic anchor for it was the parallax view, how like things seem to move at different speeds depending on their distance from you. So we were looking for places to re-emphasize this theme, and here in this overworld mode we're just thinking about looking at things from a different angle or from a different perspective. So you see characters that you've encountered before in vignettes and so on, but just from really far away from the bird's view. What else can I tell you about this one? Yeah, it's kind of like a little harder to navigate, I think, in some ways, because you have to follow the cardinal directions. I guess it's a little easier just because it's fairly simple. You only have to find one spot, and it's like, let me make sure I add the note. Yeah, okay. Let's see where the directions are here. Oh yeah, Dr. Truman's house. Oh, that's from... Yeah, you have to follow the Green River way out east and then hop over Lake Cumberland. So the directions are a little bit different because they're based on these landforms, and they take the cardinal directions into account, like drive east, drive north, or something. And then you can fly out and find the forest. So that's what we call the Julian overworld. Yeah, this scene, again, this happens... Let me open up a museum scene. Yeah, this happens after this scene in the museum. And up top here, remember Julian, like, I wonder if I have a bookmark that can show this moment. Yeah, I can show it from here. Okay, I'm going to fast forward. Oh, there's another thing. If you work on games that have a lot of content in them, you should add a fast forward button. And then, oops, the other thing you should add is a skip button that just ends the current conversation. Okay, talk to Ezra here. So yeah, Ezra, he gives us directions and mentions his brother Julian's going to help us get there. I'll let the dog finish walking over, okay, and then kill this conversation. And then this happens. Right? So Julian flies by. Whoops, that's the rain. Julian flies by and grabs us. And there was, for a long time, a pretty bad bug where right as Julian grabs you, like right at that moment when he grabs the player, the whole game would crash. And it would happen really randomly. And it was really hard to track down. We couldn't get any logging info from people who it was happening to that shed any light on it. It was just like, 1 in every 100 computers did it, 1 in 10 times or something. It was really frustrating. So what we did to resolve that temporarily, eventually the problem stopped happening, which is cool. But the way we resolved that at first was we set, so basically here's Julian. Whoops. Yeah, here's Julian. We set a game variable when Julian is like over here, and then we clear the game variable when he's here. So if he picks up the player here, the game variable is set, and if he's done or he hasn't done it yet, the game variable is not set. And then whenever the player starts the game, it checks to see if that flag was set, and if it was set, then it opens up this special scene called Julian Crash Recovery. And this is a scene that you can only get in that moment. You can only get in that condition if the game crashed at that exact moment. And it's just Shannon saying, hey, Conway, I think you passed out, but look where we are. And it just warps you to the overworld. So that was a way that we kind of like managed that crash doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, I think we have some questions here. What's the skip button? Yeah, you can skip dialogue with the end key, and you can fast forward with the F key. But in order to get those on, you have to turn on the secret developer mode. And I'm not going to tell you how to do that, but I think you can probably figure it out if you haven't already. So let's see. There's one more kind of map mode, which is the river world. And this is the map mode in Act 4. This is another procedural one, so it kind of, if you look at it just in the scene view, all you can see is this really strange geometry that represents the lake. It looks super weird on its own. It looks kind of like an organ to me, or like 3 like turkeys sort of stuck together. But yeah, obviously if you play it, it looks very different in the game. Okay, so this is the river world. Let me actually restart it with the audio. So yeah, this map mode is, there's kind of a lot going on in here. But yeah, so in Act 4, you're on the tugboat the whole time, and you're a passenger. And that was something we wanted to explore in this map mode, was the difference between being like a driver and being a passenger, and kind of like really get into the experience of being a passenger and treat it as not just a passive state, but like, what do you do when you're a passenger? What's that feel like? And so the choices that you have here for navigation are always about whether you choose to stay on the boat or get off the boat at certain landmarks. And then also while you're being ferried along, you have these dialogues that are, you know, branching interactive dialogues that kind of take the place of the vignettes in the other map modes. But in this case, it's this character Will telling you stories about things that you're passing on the boat. So, you know, he's talking and, yeah, telling you stories. I think some of his stories have branches, but I guess that one didn't. So in this, yeah, it's kind of hard to know where to even start with this map mode. Let me find the boat. Yeah, the boat is just out here in space. If you remember, I was talking about this one idea that we had for the Zero, where it was going to be sort of like stitched together out of different chunks that would get connected together. And I struggled to implement that using the navigation system, the Unity navigation system. Didn't play well with like dynamically reconstructing the nav mesh. So that's kind of how this scene works, except it doesn't use the nav mesh. It just uses these paths that Tomas modeled. So Tomas modeled a bunch of these kind of river tunnel chunks, and then they get sort of constructed together and connected to the lake, which is this strange organic shape here, the lake. So remember, this is in a river and a lake. So a river that connects to a lake, and they're all underground in caves. So that's the two kind of spaces that we modeled here, that Tomas modeled here. And you can encounter different landmarks depending on whether you're on the river or on the lake, and you kind of go back and forth between the two types of spaces. They have different sonic treatments. There's like a lake, like a bed of ambient music for the lake and a bed of ambient music for the river. And then they also, the river has another sound that comes in as the tunnel gets tighter and sort of glitchier. So like in the Zero, the tunnel walls are sort of procedural, and they get modified according to like a noise texture. So they get crunchier and sort of more jagged and glitchier. And as that happens, you can hear this like weird crackling sound kind of fade in. I'm going to start the scene again. Hope it's random, so I'm just going to kind of restart it and hope we get a glitchier section of the tunnel. Yeah. So it was kind of subtle there, but we passed through a section where the tunnel was sort of folded in on itself, and there was this glitchy background sound, like crackling background sound that faded in. And then the other part of the music here. Oops. Okay, that was kind of weird. The other part of the music here is the guitar piece that plays whenever Will is talking. It's sort of meant to emulate like strumming a guitar at a campfire while you're like telling stories or something. Okay, let me open up a bookmark here so I can try to show another part of it. So, yeah, what's a good spot to look at here? I'll try this moth swarm one. So the structure of Act 4, like I said, you're a passenger, and you're on the ferry, and the ferry has specific stops that it's going to make no matter what you choose to do. And at most of those stops, you have a choice about whether you want to get off the tugboat and walk around a little bit, or if you want to stay on the tugboat and see what happens on the tugboat while people are ashore. And these are like mutually exclusive branching options. And our idea was that you would play Act 4 twice and see these different options. It's actually, the structure kind of goes back to our first design vision for Act 4 that we discarded after working on it for, I don't know, 6 or 9 months or something, where Act 4 was going to be really short and you were just going to like play it over and over again in a sort of Groundhog Day style mode. So we didn't end up doing that. It didn't fit with the pacing of the game, the rest of the way the game is paced, where you kind of take your time. There was this like conflict of pacing between the player replaying the same thing over again and wanting to kind of skip ahead stuff they've already seen versus the kind of slow revelation kind of pace that we wanted to have with the rest of the game. So we cut that way back, but we did keep the idea of like wanting you to play through it at least twice. So that's why we have these kind of mutually exclusive branching choices at almost every stop. And a lot of things change depending on whether you stayed on board or went ashore at the last stop. So one thing that changes is Will's like reflection in between the stop that you just left and the next stop. So we just left the tiki bar here, and we're on our way to, I don't remember what comes after the tiki bar. So this is a really cool scene. I like the way the moths look here. But after you leave the tiki bar, you'll see this little kind of vignette. This is a story that Will tells about these about all those moths that live by this sort of ruined sunflower orchard. But you only get this scene if you stayed on you get this scene if you went ashore to the tiki bar. If you stayed on the boat, then instead you get a story from Will that is like basically a recap of what happened at the tiki bar, so that you still get filled in on some of the kind of crucial events that happened there. Although Will's telling of what happened at the tiki bar is different, it varies a little bit from what you see when you land there. So it's kind of like it was a way for us to manage some of the exposition that like is kind of crucial plot exposition within Act 4 in case you only play through it once, but also a way to kind of like play with this idea of like faulty memory and forgetting, which is the sort of thematic anchor of Act 4. It's all about forgetting. So these varying recollections about what might have happened if you had gotten off the boat at the tiki bar, or at every stop it replays the same pattern. That's our kind of instance of that thematic anchor in the Act 4 overworld. And this vignette is about these two sisters who were neighbors and were really close neighbors, even though they were rivals, and about how the border between their houses sort of dissolved after they lived as neighbors for a while. That's the other major theme of Act 4, is the theme of borders and border crossing. Yeah, so there's a bunch of these. There's basically 2 routes through this river world that are completely different, almost completely different. They have a couple of scenes that you have to hit both times. And then here is this, probably the strangest scene in the game. It's this scene called the phone room, which is just like a phone on a platform floating, like a payphone on a platform. A phone. I just like this scene because it's like, what the hell is this thing? It's just like the weird payphone floating in the river. Yeah, what else can I show you about the river world? I think that's it. I think I've covered everything from the map modes. Let me look at my notes. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I kind of wanted to look at today. Any questions? Oh, there is one more cool map in the game. Yeah, well, we'll see if anybody has any questions, but let me open up this one other map. Oh, I can't do it from here. Go to different scene. To load the whole thing. Okay. Well, my cheat code to load this map isn't working, but this here, actually, I'll just go ahead and. The mine has its own map too, so I'm going to drive around and populate that while I answer questions, and I can show it to you. Okay. So yeah, Tyler asked if you were starting KRZ today, what would you do different? So yeah, we would do a lot of things different. Definitely would implement this bookmarks thing, like basically first. Like this has been really huge for us. And fast forwarding also, I think we didn't put that in until the end of Act 1 or something. So there are some tooling things that I know we would do differently. I've been sort of looking at a lot of other game writing tools and game narrative design tools recently. I did that series of posts on our Patreon about some other, about kind of introspection about our own writing tools based on looking at some other writing tools. And there are some things that I've learned from Ink that that I would definitely steal on a new project. I would totally use. So one of the biggest things that I think I want to borrow from Ink on whatever we do next is in our dialogue files, or anywhere in the game basically, we have this like main database of like game flags that tell like, did Conway pick up the D20 in the basement, or like, did Conway already talk to Shannon about X, Y, or Z? So we have a bunch of those variables, and we define all those variables by hand, and then at a specific moment in dialogue or clicking on an action or something, we have some code to like manually change the value of those variables. So we have to plan all of that, like any information we're going to save, we have to kind of plan it and like explicitly implement it. In Ink, it actually is like tracking basically every choice that you make, or every every line of dialogue that you see is like getting recorded to a database there. And then later, even if you didn't plan for it, you can look back and query the save file and say, like, did they ever choose this choice in dialogue or see this option? And that would be really great, because then we could, if I had done that from the start, we could go back and refer to decisions made in Act 1 that we hadn't planned to kind of like have later things reflect. Even without having planned those, we could still have this, if something comes up and we're like, it would have been great to know if the player chose this option in the first act. So I think like I would err on the side of saving more data on a new project. And yeah, as far as the map modes, I don't think there's anything I would do differently about those now. I'm really happy with where we ended up with all of those. And these kind of early experiments that we did were, sort of failures in a sense that they were creative dead ends, but they were really important in figuring out what we, you have to like always have to make things to throw away. That's how you learn what the problem space is and how you get the vocabulary that you can use to solve the problem. So that's an important step of the process, to make stuff to throw away, I think. And for other tooling, I don't know, there's so many things that we're really looking forward to throwing away this huge code base and starting from scratch. One other big thing that I regret in the architecture of Kentucky Route Zero is the way that we've done sound programming. There's like 10 different ways to play a sound in the game that are just like different things that I threw together because of the special needs of different moments. And now it's like, to tell Ben how to change a sound file in the scene, it's like I have to, it really just depends on which of my many sound systems that I built I decided to use for that sound. I have to give them different instructions for each one. So I try to like unify approaches to problems a little bit more in the future. Hot Dog asks if you can talk to Carrington in the phone room. That's true, but will you miss him if you stay on the boat? Yeah, you miss Carrington's call in Act 4 if you don't go to the phone room. And also Carrington only calls if you have met him in Act 1, of course. But if you stay on the boat, then you get to see the dogs sleeping, which is a really cool moment. And then Artis says, how do you test branching from choices that happen in previous scenes in the editor? And yeah, what we do is we make different bookmarks based on different choices. So I don't know if I have one here that I can remember. I know I have some from Act 5, but I'm not going to show you those. But yeah, I don't remember if I have any here. But yeah, we'll have bookmarks that are like, did they name the dog Blue and they're in the distillery or something, just to like test out early game variables. So I'll actually show you what those bookmarks look like. Let's see, actually don't want to open that, but let's debug. Yeah, so here's our bookmarks. Yeah, so let me open up an interesting one of these. Here's one. So this is one of the bookmark files. If you've ever, for some reason, opened up a Kentucky Route Zero save file, they look almost exactly the same. And it's just a list of variable names and values. And so we can write these by hand. Sometimes I write them by hand. But you can also, we can also just copy and paste chunks of variables out of our save file as we play. That's usually what I do. So I'm just playing the game and then periodically minimizing it and looking at the save file and copying a bunch of variables out of there. So there's like a billion variables in our save files because of this thing I was talking about earlier, where we have to explicitly define every variable that we want to check later. So we end up recording a lot of data without even knowing exactly what we're going to use it for later. Oh, there was one other cool thing in the river world that I wanted to show you, but it's kind of hard to demonstrate. But in Act 4, there are a few moments where we actually check how fast the player is reading. We like calculate their reading speed and try to average it over time to have a sense of like how quick a reader the player is. And we use that in the river world in order to gauge how long it should take you to get to the next landmark. And based on that, so we look at how far it is to the next landmark and how much text Will is going to read, and we determine the speed of the boat and to try to line it up so that you reach the next landmark right as soon as you're done reading Will's story. So that's another cool thing in the river world. Yeah. Yeah, RT says, always curious how people structure their Unity projects with carrying things between scenes. So yeah, ours is all like data that's saved to a file, and each scene reads the file anew when the scene starts up. And so that's how we make it easy to sort of reinflate the game at any point from save files. Cool. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there. I've been going for a little over an hour, and we'll upload this video link it on the Patreon. It'll be on our channel, I guess. And if you have any more questions, feel free to drop a comment on Patreon or hit us up in the Discord. Thanks for hanging out. It's great to chat with you all. Let's see.